Welcome, the few, the brave, the approaching lunchtime Friday. Yeah, thanks for joining us. My name is John Gravois. This is my infamous colleague, Tom Wason. We both work on ArcGIS Hub. We're the remote workers. We're in Redlands, and most of the team's out in DC. And today we're going to be talking about building hub-ready apps for constituent engagement. So, what the heck is a hub-ready app, right? This is what we're going to spend the hour teasing apart and talking about. We're going to see some examples of them in the wild, and then talk through what makes them unique. And we're presupposing that you're at least familiar with Hub conceptually. Some of you guys probably have more experience with it than others, but we're going to dive into the topic of hub-ready apps by looking at what it looks like from the perspective of a Hub user, and that hopefully that'll kill two birds with one stone. So the premise of Hub, what I see as the really interesting and useful feature of Hub is pivoting away from the focus of being on the agency itself or the data itself, and what data is being made available, how do we get people excited about the data, and flipping that narrative and instead focusing on what we use the word initiatives, but it's this idea that there are galvanizing themes and this idea of rallying cries, that the people, if you want to engage the community and the public, they don't really care about, there's, I guess, some of us nerds that care about CSVs for the sake of CSVs, but most people care about issues, and they care about mostly holding politicians accountable to their campaign promises. So using the data as a means to an end to tell a story and engage in a dialogue and be empirical and track progress, that's what Hub's all about. So to be a good Hub customer, you have to have open data. That's a necessary prerequisite, but you also have to be willing to embrace this notion that you're going to measure, you're going to set a goal, you're going to measure where you're at, you're going to try some things, and then you're going to see how well they work. So once a Hub user gets into the product here and they're designing this initiative and creating it, we've curated a experience for them that guides them in the ways that we think are helpful to not just check boxes, but do all the things that are necessary to really drive that engagement. So here's an example of an initiative that's nearly ready for public release. It's an economic development initiative to help communities grow their local economies, and something that's similar to the other initiatives. The initiative is broken up. There's components and apps that support it, but the main themes and steps are: one, informing the public, sharing the data and letting people download and explore it and bringing awareness to the issue. Then two, listening to the public, actually gathering feedback and engaging to see what the public has to say. And then what I said before, monitoring progress. So there's going to be tools that work in the collection. So a hub-ready app sort of fits into one of those niches. These are not the only options. The steps can be expanded. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but in general, this is the sort of pattern that we recommend. And the app I'm going to show you here it's got a few data sets configured, but for the most part, this is just the default stock without a lot of content coming from the user. They can add data, but if they just go ahead and configure the app, Hub is generating the supporting items for them and making it a lot more automated, so they don't have to go in and author the map and follow the data model and follow a lot of steps. They can do something really quickly and get up and running, and then ship an app that actually is really useful. So this app, you may have seen it. I know they showed it in the EPC plenary. I'm not sure if it made it to the Dev Summit plenary or not, but bear with me here for a second. I pressed the wrong button. I don't want to view it, or I don't want to edit it. I want to just use it. This is a web application, and it's geared towards business owners and prospective business owners that are coming to the community. You're using DC, but this could get launched in any other location. And we're providing a lot of rich sort of Esri hosted data. This is tapestry data, so they can dig in and see what the predominant demographic block is and what the population and some root statistics on demographics. We've also got information on spending. So this pulls in from Esri's geo-enrichment data. There's some more premium services. There's categories that are going to be relevant to different business owners, so it's generally useful. There's also some indicators based on population, home value, household size, to try and isolate the target demographics for a prospective business. Then we get into some categories. Based on the data that's present, these tabs either expand with more content or disappear entirely. So I just put in a few just minimal data layers, but this could get more and more expansive. So if you have data on zoning and particular zoning categories, you can include that. If there's specific incentive zones or underutilized business districts, if you've denoted and the community has other supporting data. These we call optional indicators. They make a richer experience, but none of them are crucial for the app to function. Here's another great tool for letting business owners analyze available space. They can filter based on square footage or price range to see where they're at. They can also go in and compare to other existing businesses and see who else is already there, who they're going to compete against. There's some tools. The only tools that you need to actually sign in for, and this is something people can do with the free community account. They can calculate drive times and do some statistics within a particular location. So you can sign in and do that. There's also some information here in the footer. If we sign in, I'll go ahead and do that and use the employee login for use. This is something that anybody in the community can sign in with social media login. They can run analysis. They can also search for an address if they've got a prospective location in mind, and see some statistics here. If we go into different categories in the footer, there's a lot of rich information here. But the things that are worth noting are if I switch gears and I simulate doing this on a phone, I can refresh the page. You can see that this is designed in a way that all this information is still accessible from a small form factor device. The performance is good. They can navigate all that. The way that the information is presented, I think, is fairly intuitive and doesn't require, there's not a lot of GIS-centric knowledge required. So there's a lot of content here. 3D scene layers is something they can append. It's optional, but there's some razzle-dazzle that doesn't need to be there, but could be. The design's good, the performance is good. This is a really nice example of a rich hub-ready app and super easy to deploy. Good examples are great, but there's not a ton of substance there. It's hard to say, okay, well, now I'm ready to go write my hub-ready app. So we wrote a checklist, and this is the patterns and practices and requirements that sort of set these apps apart and gets you into the territory where it's something that we could actually ship along with the hub product. So we think of this as a continuum. You might develop an app for a specific community and do it as a case study and deliver it and maybe refactor later to make it hub ready. So not every app is going to be hub ready right out of the gate, but having these patterns in mind the whole time is going to hopefully influence your design and how you go about doing it. So this is something that's on GitHub. It's work in progress documentation. For the most part, the presentation today is going to mirror the pattern here of some of these things that we consider key requirements of a good hub-ready app. The good news is these are all either patterns that have been present in the ArcGIS ecosystem. We're not deviating from the rest of ArcGIS, or they're patterns that are becoming more and more popular and pronounced just in modern software development across the board. So we're not asking you to go in a different direction or go against the grain. I would say probably the most fundamental component of a hub-ready app is, in one way or another, it's going to use the data from that community. So if you write an app that's just plugging into a hard-coded service, you're a consultant and you write an app for one customer, That's great, but that's not a hub-ready app, right? The hub-ready app needs to work just as well with Washington, D.C.'s data as it works with Redlands or Palm Springs or some small community with just 10,000 people. So we'll show another example. I'm going to show one that's actually already in production that we can sort of bear down on and dig into the guts of a little bit. So Collision Lens is one of the apps in Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a popular initiative that's already there. This is for raising awareness and handling or trying to combat pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities, to make the streets safer. And this is something that's happening all across the globe, and communities of all different sizes are participating in Vision Zero and trying to tackle these issues. So in the raise awareness block of this initiative, creating an app to summarize the collisions that you've already had so people can see how serious the issue is a really great app that sort of serves a really specific purpose. So in this case, I'm going to say that we haven't configured anything yet. There's only one data set that's required to create this application. Adding the data here, I need to provide my own collision data. So I've got a key here that tells me, okay, I can select some data. I've got to go in, and this is where you've got to already have configured or shared some open data. And when you're creating a hub-ready app, you have an opportunity to say what data you need. And you want to be thoughtful about what's really you're likely to get, but you also want to drive or agencies to, do what they need to do. So you're an advocate as well. So I'm going to search for my open data for my some collision layers. I can select this data. It only allows me to select the geometry types that are actually valid. So your app could only accept points, or it might be more flexible. We select that layer, and once we select the layer, then at this point, this is an indicator that has a few attributes that need to be mapped. So Esri for a long time has published data models and provided samples and templates that required a really rigid data model from users. This is an effort to make this a little bit more flexible. So I'm able to say, okay, if you tell me what column has information about the number of injuries, we'll just use the column that you have. You don't have to have it named the exact thing that we would have it named. So fatalities here, I select these, I save and close. That's as involved as it is to bring that data to the table. This is a configuration. Then I configure the app. We're going to cook the web map for the user. We're going to cook the application with their JSON and make it all dynamic. So as an app developer, you follow the same pattern as you do with configurable apps in the rest of ArcGIS.com. And all the content's going to be spun up. They never have to open up ArcGIS Online Map Viewer. They never have to use ArcGIS Pro. This is a pretty seamless thing. I'm going to click and view this. If you guys haven't already seen this application, this is a web application that just takes that one data set and clusters based on density. And as we pan and zoom around the map, it updates the statistics and summarizes what's in the map view. So this is another one that's responsive. It works on a phone. This is taking on the style of DC, so it actually looks like a DC app as opposed to somebody else's app. The good news is for this app, I'll show you kind of how we'll dig into the guts a little bit. And I forgot to, bear with me here. Ember portal. There it is. Just to get into this is a developer conference, so we'll get into the guts of how this works. I keep showing stuff where it's like, yeah, then we do all this stuff and it works really great. Isn't that nice? But we want to see actually how that works. How it works is in that configuration dialog for the user to provide the indicator layer and then actually see it in the app, we have to actually create the web map for them with that content. So how we do that is, I got some boilerplate that I can copy. In the Hub administrative dialog, we have a copy of what is going to go into the web map, the template for the web map. And at first, we pass in some variables and we say, we don't know what the URL of the fatality and injuries layer is going to be yet. It'll get supplied later, but here's the placeholder. And the same way, we don't know what the name of the field is going to be with the number of injuries, but that will be supplied later. And then at runtime, when we configure the indicators and deploy the app, we supply those settings, and then we get output normal web map JSON like you'd work with in the rest of ArcGIS Online. So being hub ready in this sense is you're ultimately going to be working with a web map the same way you'd work with a web map everywhere else. You're just having to be thoughtful about what data is my app going to require, and how do I design the app in the way that they provide that URL on the fly to me. This is a open source project from our team. We call it AdLib, that does this templating. And this is just like a utility JavaScript thing. It doesn't have anything to do with GIS or anything else. It's just a generally useful templating engine. So you can use this for other purposes if you want, but it's something that we kind of broke out as a component of the product and want to see if anybody else has the other crazy ideas for. And this is kind of how we get to the point of making a app that is configurable as opposed to static, and it's indicator aware in that it has either mandatory or optional data sets that are used to either do an analysis or bring attention or let users interact. There's kind of a lot of patterns there, but those are the themes and how you can get started. The app that I just showed, this viewer, this is something that is also open source. It's up on GitHub. This is a configuration of one of the templates that you find in ArcGIS Online. So you can look at that code. It's on GitHub. It's been around a while, and dig into it and see how it works. There's also some examples here, another GitHub repo called the Configurable App Examples for 3x and 4x. We want you to be using the latest version of the JavaScript API 4x. So this has some templates and samples that show you how to design an app that pulls in that configuration data, reads from a web map. There's a lot of great boilerplate here that is going to be useful to you if you're designing something from scratch. We'll share a link to the slides at the end too if you need all that. So the next thing that is crucial in a hub-ready app is ArcGIS Identity. So in the first example I showed you, signing in to do drive times and see some of this rich analysis. And this is a really important sort of distinction in that we don't want community. When somebody buys the hub, they get community users for anybody, and anybody in the public can use social media login, create. They've got an identity, and they can access all of this rich Esri content and capability. We don't want that to be a paywall, not a paywall, but like a barrier or a firewall to getting started with Hub. We want the community to engage with this more broadly. So designing a hub-ready app doesn't mean make sure people have to sign in order to see the app at all. This notion of anonymously available apps that the community can engage with, and then they only use identity for something that actually helps them. If they're running an analysis, they need to provide credentials. If they're going to submit feedback, some of our customers need to collect anonymous feedback. That's fine too. But to have an option to provide your identity to really get engaged and provide more substantive feedback, start a conversation, criticize, have a counter narrative. The dialogue is important, and identity is a key component of that. So there's a couple idiosyncrasies of Hub. Here's a demo in that configurable app examples repo. I added a couple of examples here that are Hub specific that talk about how we do authentication in Hub. And for the most part, this is just the OAuth that you're already familiar with, or it's a good time to get familiar with, of having the user sign in straight to ArcGIS Online and then go back to your app with their identity. That's like the most trustworthy, modern way to design your authentication. In this example, there's not a lot going on, but I'm showing a traffic layer. This is another premium layer. So you can have premium content in your app. This is proxied via proxied service, so you don't. There's a lot of clever ways you can sort of do a lot of fun stuff without having the user sign in. I wanted to show an example of that, and then have sign in be optional. So here they click the sign in dialog. This kicks off the OAuth flow. And what we're doing here is we're sending the user straight to the community org that's set up for these users that has as many people as want to get involved can. Using social media login, they can sign in. And by pointing them straight to the community org, we bypass this notion that you see in a lot of other places in ArcGIS Online where access is more restricted. An administrator has to approve you. So a hub-enabled org, the community org, it's set to let people sign up all on their own. They've got a safe sandbox where they can get started. They can use an account that they already have and be a user without signing up and waiting for approval and going through all these tedious steps. So you can see here in the code, there's an example of this in JavaScript and TypeScript. I'll dig into just a little bit of actual JavaScript. And you can see I ripped off, the template. They've got a bunch of other boilerplate in here that I just use. And the only block here that's kind of relevant to you guys, it's not too much, is this shows an example where the community org might be provided at runtime via the app configuration. It's also something that you can get when you search the portal properties. So you can make a request here. It's already something that's cooked into this boilerplate. You dig into the portal properties for the community org URL, because you need that instead of sending them to arcgis.com where they just create a public account that doesn't have all the same goodies. And then kick off a flow where OAuth is delayed. It happens when they click the button, maybe. So this is a model, an example that you can use. But it's crucial that you sort of think about identity as something that's going to unlock capabilities and increase the conversation, but not something that you'd use to sort of restrict access. That's the demo. And that's more than enough talking for me. What's the
3?
Lucky number 3.
All right, so continuing with the checklist shared themes, we want the organization's brand to, really flow through into your application. Is anyone here familiar with the relatively recent concept of organizations having a shared theme? A little bit. So, you can look here, you can clearly see this app, even though this app was not. This is one of our configurable apps, but it carries over, it's very clearly a US Forest Service app. And it has their brand colors, it has their logo, and the way that in this particular case, the way this was achieved was through organization shared themes. So each organization has in their settings, has the ability to define a few limited set of theme properties. It's mainly around branding, colors, and a logo, and so for different areas of any application, so the header, body, buttons. And then Esri's, really? That's not exactly what I want to do. Sorry, I don't know why those pictures seem so much smaller. Oh, I know, I'm not in full screen mode. All of our configurable apps, most of our configurable apps can take advantage of this. And it's something that your app can as well. Unfortunately, however, those theme properties are stored on the portal self API, and they're only available to logged in users. So what that means for you and what it means for our configurable apps is those theme properties can't be fetched dynamically at runtime. So the way that they work in Esri's configurable apps is during the administrative process, when an administrator is configuring a configurable app, because that administrator is logged in, they fetch the theme properties and they set up defaults, and the administrator can override them, and then whatever they choose during configuration is stored with the app. So at the hub, we created another way. You can still use that. The problem is the only way for you to take advantage of it is for you to create a self-configurable app. Is anyone familiar with that or know what that means in terms of the platform? Yeah. It just means that when you create an item for that application, you define the URL to some application that will configure it. So you write not only the application, but a configuration interface. And then when someone says configure app, it goes to your configuration interface. If you're not doing that already, then you're not really going to be able to take advantage of shared themes, which is why in the hub, we created another avenue for you to get at those shared themes dynamically at runtime. So as John showed, initiatives you can launch applications, and one type of application is a hub site. And it's basically a website, so this could be the landing page for that initiative. And any hub site, whether it's an open data site, an initiative site, has the ability to override the organization's shared themes. So hub sites, when you're configuring a hub site, there is a settings panel that will let you, by default, it takes the organization themes, but you can, at this point for that site, create your own brand for that site. So for example, Vision Zero, you might want to make the header giant red, to indicate, the danger and severity of this thing. Or for whatever reason, that particular site, for that initiative, whatever maybe it's your open data thing and you want to have a pink happy banner to make people feel happy when they come to get data. A site can have its own theme, and you, as a developer, can now fetch these from the hub site's item. So this is an item in ArcGIS Online, just like any other application, and the type of item happens to be a hub site, but and I'll show you, we store the themes as JSON as a resource on the item. So let's see what that. So right here, if you look at this URL, you're going to the item, ID, resources, theme.json. So there's a well-known theme pattern, and what you see at that resource is just a simple JSON document defining the same things we saw in the configuration UI, the header colors, text colors. So you can fetch this JSON at runtime and then make your app load, change CSS properties based on these. And I'll show you an example of an application that does that. This is an application called My Street, and the purpose of it is you enter an address, and it goes to a web map, goes downward through each layer, and finds out what, for that particular layer, what's at that location. So the idea is to give people who may be new to the city information on what time is trash pickup, what's the population, what's their neighborhood council member. You configure it by saying, by adding layers to that web map to say how you want to have people find out. So this is my old address in Los Angeles, and so it has the information for that. This has also been deployed for DC, and you can see that it's got a different theme, different colors. So back here we have Los Angeles's branding, this sort of dark blue background and orange link colors, and here in DC, they have a white background, light blue header. And those are just coming from that theme JSON that we saw earlier. So this application knows where to find the theme JSON for this, the hub site that's related to this initiative. And so just to take a quick look to see how that works, this is an Ember application, and we've defined a custom component called inline style vars. And what that's going to do, and you hand it this config JSON URL, which is the URL to that theme. So when the application booted, it went and fetched the item for the application. It found the URL to this theme JSON, and then inside of that component, when it gets after it goes and fetches the JSON, once it gets it, it goes through and starts reading the JSON and starts building out CSS styles, and it just injects them as a style tag directly there into the page. So that's a way that you can take advantage of that. We also want to create accessible apps, not just because. So we kind of moved from. Now we're kind of moving away from things that sort of are good practices within ArcGIS Online as a platform, but just generally good practices as application developers. Not only is this a requirement for many cities, if there are many government agencies at all levels. There's different regulations, Section 508 and WCAG, that these agencies have to comply with, but also, it's a good thing to do. You want people to be able to use your app. You want to be as inclusive as possible. If you have the ability to go back in time, you should see Kelly's talk from this morning, Kelly and Tao. They gave a good talk, and if you weren't there, I can say one thing, a tool that will help you is this.
YouTube.
Oh yeah, and hopefully it will be on the YouTube. there's a tool called ArcGIS, which allows you to automate testing of accessibility. And we actually use this in the hub. We have in our continuous integration process, we'll run ArcGIS tests against the hub and tell us where we have areas that are out of compliance. So this is one of the reasons that you know, I'm not too much of an expert on this, is because we have, you know, people on our team who are, and they give us guidelines, and we automate the process of, you know, we either create components that already have these accessible tags and everything in them, and I don't need to think about it, I'm just reusing those components, or we have this automated testing that just sort of tells me what to do. So that acts as a good starting point. It can be a little overwhelming. There's a lot to these guidelines, so we've curated a short list on the site that John mentioned earlier. You did mention that site, right?
I did.
Okay. Under the accessibility section of the checklist, so we have this a short list of ones. It's kind of the things that are the most bang for your buck. The first is anything that's a visual component, like an image or a chart, provides some kind of text description of what it is. I think this is one, as web developers, I know that this is like the one that I knew before, you know, really working on a product that really cared about this. You want to use semantic markup that defines what something is and what its relationship is to other parts of the page. So instead of just using a UL or an unordered list for navigation, use the nav tag, and that helps the screen readers know that we're talking about navigation here. If you have a label for something, for a form input, use the for attribute to identify which form input it's for. So these are sort of good practices there. You want it to be operable via keyboard. This doesn't just help people that, with disabilities, it also helps developers like me. Like, I'm sort of a keyboard only kind of guy. So if you do this, it'll make it easier for me to use your site, which is important. So you want to do things like tab index, and as someone moves through an application using keyboards, you want to have some visible indication of where the focus is. And finally, with color, you want to use, you want to make sure you're adhere to minimum contrast guidelines, and there's a link here to a blog post about that Kelly wrote a while back, and just helping you identify and tools that will help you figure out what those are. All right. Next, we want to engage citizens where they're at, which hopefully is not reading their phone while they're riding a bike on train tracks. But if they're doing any one of those things, they're probably not at a laptop, right? They're not going to be somewhere where they have a full screen, immersive, high-powered device that can process a lot of code. So a hub-ready app has to be required. Responsiveness is required. And there's a lot of confusion about, I think, the term responsive. I would define it as the app adjusts what content is visible or how it's displayed based on the screen size and orientation of the device that's being used. This is built into the ArcGIS JavaScript API, so that's good. You're already off to a good foot there. If you've got the ArcGIS JavaScript API map on your page, there's some links here that are, it's not opening. Well, there's a link on this slide that will take you to a few samples that show how to create responsive widgets using some of the tools that are built in the ArcGIS API. Also, responsiveness is nothing new. This has been part of the web for many years now, and there are several mature frameworks that you can use. We use Bootstrap within the hub. I recommend it. It just gives you all this by default. It's just, I don't have to think about what the screen size breaks that I need to support are. Bootstrap has already done that work for me. I just use Bootstrap tags, and they will automatically adjust based on the size of the device. Beyond those frameworks, there are now new modern CSS techniques that you can use that don't require one of those frameworks, such as Flexbox and Grid. And those are really, the browser support for those is really, they really only work for modern browsers, so they just don't really work for IE. I don't know exactly what the browser support level is, but if you're supporting modern browsers, you can take advantage of these, and then you don't need the extra overhead of bringing a framework into your app, but you are a little more on your own. You have to learn these and know how to use them to achieve the same techniques. But this is where that confusion around responsive comes in. We need to move beyond just changing the screen size based on what device it is. We really need to, I'll just wait for this to load. We need to respond, right? We need to not have that first part be the experience that anybody has all the time. And maps are heavy. So as map application developers, we have an extra challenging burden here. You know, if you read a lot of what is encouraged and best practices and what people think is acceptable out in the web world at large, a lot of them aren't taking into account the ability to render a 3D scene in a mobile device. So we know this here, so we are working on it. The JavaScript API team works really hard on taking these impressive capabilities and getting them into the browser in a way that it can work on mobile devices. But I think the first thing that you as application developers need to think about is whether or not your app needs a map. And it may sound funny at this conference, but there are some that don't, that can still engage the platform, utilize the platform. And this is where, as much work as the JavaScript API team is doing, there's going to be a hard limit on what they can do, and we as application developers need to pick up the torch there and start making decisions about how much of the JavaScript API we use, when we use it, and be smart about that. So if you've got an application that's like this, that's primarily searching through maybe portal items or searching through a feature service and returning results in a text kind of way, we have a library called ArcGIS REST.js, which is a very lightweight, tiny library that will enable you to do those things, maybe just geocode, and you can use that in your application, and you don't have to incur the cost of getting a heavy mapping library in there. Another scenario you might have, kind of moving up a scale from that, is you don't have a map all the time. You only have a map way down on some nested route. They go 3 clicks deep, and finally you've decided to load a map at that location. It's only relevant to the user at that point. We have a tool called Esri Loader, which will lazy load the JavaScript API, and only at that location then do they incur the cost of that. Which is kind of cool because already they're going to have to, you're sort of waiting for map tiles and that sort of stuff to load. You can just sort of also load the JavaScript API at the same time. There's already sort of a loading spinner experience at that point. This is really important for apps where you're really targeting a mobile audience, because that first screen can load instantaneously, and then as they move on, you can see the map. If kind of moving up one more step on the ladder, you might have an application, there are a lot of applications like this, where the map is really central to it. The application doesn't make sense without the map. And so in these cases, you're going to have to sort of bite the bullet there, but there's one other thing you can do, which is demonstrated in this new Maps app JavaScript template that Renee just released a couple weeks ago, and that is to configure it as a progressive web app. And progressive web apps could apply to all the every level that we've talked about so far, but they become particularly important at this level where you're going to have to load the map from the get-go. So what is a progressive web app? Well, this is something that Google's done a lot of work to define, and there are 3 core tenets. Progressive web apps first have to be reliable. And the idea of a progressive web app is a web application that can be just as good as a native mobile application when used on a phone. So how do we achieve that experience of how can web applications compete with native mobile applications? Well, the first thing is they have to be reliable. Users can't click on this thing and sometimes it responds, sometimes it doesn't. They have to take into account the fact that the user may be offline. And so if nothing else, they have to provide at least something that says, you're offline, there's nothing I can do. In the case of a mapping application, we can't fetch tiles, there's nothing else we can do, that's it, you know. But at least we've told them, we know you tried to load this, but we can't help you. Next is when they have, you know, unreliable, spotty 3G network coverage, we need to be able to work into that environment to the degree that's possible. So they need to be fast. And there's a new technology called Service Worker that enables web applications to have really tight control over what they cache. So you can imagine, in the case of mapping applications, caching tiles is a good idea because they don't change very often. And caching the JavaScript API also is a good idea. It doesn't change very often. Finally, you know, to compete with mobile apps, we want these things to be sticky, we want them to be engaging. So in addition to doing the work that you've already done to make this something relevant to the user, we want to be able to provide an experience where they can install this on their home screen. And so progressive web apps, the mobile operating systems have a way of saying, all right, you've clicked on this link 3 times, I'm going to show, you know, Chrome, the mobile Chrome browser will show a little dialog saying, hey, would you like to add an icon for this on your home screen? And progressive web apps can define what their icon color should be, and then when they do launch it, it takes over the Chrome UI and gives the branded color. So I'm going to show, an example of this now. So first I'm going to mention this tool, Lighthouse, which is a Google tool that allows you to measure how well your app does in terms of being a progressive web app. And I also mentioned the reason that we look at René's example application is that he takes advantage of the service worker. So he uses right here in his application configuration, he's got these parameters here that define what should be cached. So here he's saying cache the JavaScript API, cache anything that comes from the base map URL, and then also cache items. So if his app is always going to load the same item, right? You know, a configurable app that's loading the app JSON from an item, he wants the user to cache that. So this is going to make it so, you know, there may be a heavy cost of loading this the first time the person loads it. The next time it should be much faster. Kind of taking a step back to where I mentioned this is okay, sorry. No, I'll show you. So here's an application I wrote called Esri Pre-Act Pwa. It's using a JavaScript framework called Pre-Act, and there's a boilerplate for Pre-Act that has all this progressive web app stuff built in, where it can define. It gives you the definitions for the service workers. It gives you the definition for the app manifest, which is where you say what icon goes on the home screen. And how this app works is there's some home screen. This is going to demonstrate Esri Loader and the lazy loading the JavaScript API as well. So the home screen, there's you know, not much to it. It's just text, and then if someone goes onto the map, then it goes and loads the map tiles there. And again, this shows that benefit of deferring. You can see, you know, if we go here, reload the home screen, it's almost instantaneous. You couldn't even see it load. We go to the map, and there's a little bit of a lag and delay. And I wrote this application to demonstrate just really maxing out what is the best possible performance you can get with the JavaScript API. So let's look at the Lighthouse Score to measure, to see what things are measured. So this is, Lighthouse is a browser plugin. It's also a tool that, just like Axe, that you can run in your continuous integration. We haven't set that up for Hub yet, but that's something we're planning to do. So in the browser, you can get this Lighthouse plugin, and you can start for this app, you can measure the performance. So this is what the performance measurement is of the home page. And what it does is it shows you what your app looks like over a 3G connection after so many seconds. So at 1.6 seconds on a slow connection, we get this content. I've gotten a Lighthouse performance score of 98. So it's pretty good. Let's go look at what it is for the map. So this is what it looked like. It was loading, loading, loading. So 7.2 seconds on a 3G connection before they see tiles. But at least before that, I've got something that says it's loading within 1.6 seconds. So this got a Lighthouse score of 77. Now that's, you know, C+. You know, it's not great. My parents would not be proud, but the average JavaScript API app that doesn't do any of these loading techniques gets about a 10. So if you really need to reach that mobile audience, you need to get a map into their hands. You want to start taking advantage of the progressive web app techniques. And finally, I'm going to show you something which I meant to demo earlier, which is kind of going all the way down back to that lowest level on the list. You don't need a map. So here's a very simple app that doesn't require a map. Hub has a concept of community events. So these are things, you know, Hub administrators can set up a calendar of events with things like city council meetings or tree plantings, anything like places in real life where they want people to get engaged, not just on their phones, and come and meet and do something, engage with the community. So, and that calendar of events is implemented as a feature service. Each organization has one feature service for this. So we can search for events like Vision Zero and click on that and get the details. This is not yet what I would call a hub-ready app. This is something I whipped up in just a couple hours the other morning. And again, I used a Pre-Act CLI to just put this thing together real quick. So the way that I do this, I mentioned using that library called ArcGIS REST.js. So we have this function called getFeature from ArcGIS REST.js here. And after after the page, this is the event details page, and it's just use the get event from this feature layer. And once you have the details, you just display them here in the page template. So let's see, I think I've got this gets an 89 on, sorry here, on this events page. So this is including the time it takes to go and fetch the event information. So that is what I have to say about building apps that people can use on their phones in the real world. And we're trying to help provide examples like these that and tools that help you create those experiences that users can really engage with.
Yeah, so responsive used to be an optional thing or like a bonus or icing or something, but the stats now, 77% of Americans have a smartphone. More Americans have a smartphone than ever before, and it's not just the latest $1,000 iPhone. A lot of people are using a more affordable Android device. And there's more than 10% of adults now in the US that don't have any landline internet connection at home at all. The smartphone is their one portal or means of communication on the internet. So that's why this is important for our hub users to be able to reach everybody, and why performance and the tooling is better than it's ever been before. So we're not going to dig into quite as many details, but we're going to talk about just a few more sort of generic patterns. These are all common across modern development. Localizing, we used to consider this something that only a really mature app would have, but there's more tools than ever before to translate text. And this is important. One, to translate, a hub-ready app has to be deployed all over the world, and even within a single community, there's commonly many different languages being spoken. So there's tools built into the JavaScript API for this as well. That's one of the reasons that we use Dojo. There's also other lightweight options, like Polyglot is something that Airbnb has open sourced that is just a very dumb text editor. This is an example from a project where we're working on an OpenStreetMap. The most popular editor for OpenStreetMap online is ID, and it's using D3 under the hood. And they use a YAML file to supply the real strings. And then they, in the code, instead of supplying the raw string, you dig it out of the YAML file. So there's really kind of easier ways to do this than you might think. So it's something that's a requirement for a hub-ready app, and something that you should be thinking about localization, at least setting yourself up to to be localized later. Durable state's important. We want users to interact with the apps and answer questions and have an experience and share that experience with others. So it's important that they can share the state of the application that they were using it in. So URL parameters are the primary way of doing that. We have them in configurable apps in the JavaScript API. There's a utility method in the JavaScript API to take that URL, parse the URL, and separate out the parameters and the arguments from the rest of the URL. There's other options. You don't have to use this, but you have to have the app designed in a way that folks can interact with it and see that state be durable. Data citation is crucial too. This idea that your app has to be indicator aware, use configurable data, and then actually publicize where this data came from, so interested users can read up on the metadata and check out the methodology and figure out where this came from and who they can ask more questions. It's just good stewardship, and it supports the notion that the data is behind these great apps and experiences. And telemetry, this is the notion that your app is going to judge itself and gather statistics about its own usage, how many times it's been accessed, how many errors have been logged, how many people are accessing certain functionality. There's many tools. We don't have any ArcGIS specific tools to share with you, but Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics have the ability. You can create an account and add a key and add it to your app and get some real useful telemetry without really writing any code at all. And it can get more sophisticated. There's stuff out there like MapTix, but this notion that the hub, we're challenging our hub users to measure and judge their own success. So it's only fair that the apps do that as well. That you can provide statistics about how well it's working and then make changes to improve it over time. We've got about 5 minutes, so this is an intimate group. If you guys have any questions, don't be shy. We're hoping for feedback. This is a new talk for us. We hope you're excited. We threw a lot at you, but this is these are like gold standard modern, we're setting the bar really high because we want the hub experience to be really great, but we see this as an iterative process. We see as developing apps as case studies in specific communities. So, you gotta hit all the notes to play in the big show, but there's a process along the way to sort of have those discussions and get involved with other stakeholders and build great apps that solve problems and share. There's a back channel or another way to sort of go. You don't have to hit the ball out of the park very first swing. We want feedback about the talk so we can improve it for next time. We also want to hear more about what you guys are working on and what's you're having trouble with. You can hit us up on the GitHub repo and ask for more documentation. We're going to be fleshing out here. There's some conceptual doc. We've got some links to samples. We're going to be adding more samples here that show off different aspects of things that are crucial for a hub-ready app to help you dig in and have some more tools, so it's it's easier to accomplish. Right now we've got a really polished experience for end users of Hub. We've got a pretty great experience for Hub administrators to deploy and share. We need a richer sort of ecosystem of content, and we also need to sort of improve that developer experience so it's easier over time to do this. So I want you guys to be the guinea pigs and then do one and then do one again and see these things out all over the place.
This session doesn't have a survey.
It doesn't have a survey? I've never heard of a session that doesn't have a survey.
Most of them on top do not have a survey.
That is a mistake.
That sounds like it's conspiracy theory.
East Coast problem.
Is there hub feedback at Esri.com or I forget. There's some alias.
I tell you, almost all of them kept that.
Well, when we don't get any feedback, my feelings will be still hurt, but not as hurt. So we've got thick skins. You can write us a message on Twitter or email us if I've got cards to share. We do want that feedback, even though we're not projecting.
Esri Loader stickers too, if you want that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you can come up here and give us feedback in real person or ask questions or whatever.
Yeah, but otherwise, we're coming to a close. We hope you enjoy your conference and See you next time.
Yeah, thanks.